Hi, we'd like to continue our study of the most important elements that will help you become a more effective and more powerful debater. Whether it was an informal or formal debate, whether it was a fun debate or a well-planned, well-rehearsed debate, in the end, we need to understand the most important elements that will make your next debate more effective and more powerful. At the heart of any winning debate argument is the power of building cases. And the more you build cases, the more powerful you can reach to a conclusion and make it more effective in terms of delivering a message and making it one of the most important elements of the debate method. Building cases should be at the cornerstone of everyone who's attempting to become a more effective debater. In the end, powerful cases and powerful argumentation is the driving force that makes you either win the motion, either you are for or against that motion. So let me take you through these important elements of building cases. To start with, there is a very important technical term to do with debating, and that's called establishing the stance. The stance, or the area of stance, is the transactional and intersection between where the resolution stands in terms of agreement or disagreement. It is exactly where the battlefield is determined between the affirmative and the negative team. If the resolution is not designed to create a common ground for the affirmative and the negative teams to start building their cases, then both teams will argue their own set of arguments away from each other. In other words, you're not creating a common ground for both teams to argue on the same battlefield. That is why it's very important for the best structure of the resolution to establish a firm, unbiased, evenly distributed stance between the affirmative and the negative. And even when you receive the resolution, let's say a few days before the actual debate or on the day of the debate, you as the affirmative or negative team captains can really argue for a resolution that is more unbiased and objective and creates a good resolution where the stance is observed and protected. Once the stance is established, we can start the actual building of cases. The most common and most classical model of building strong cases is called the Tuman model. And the Tuman model was constructed in the same time period where the most prominent form of debate formats were created. It is based on three important elements in your line of reasoning. So let's say, for example, you're going to build an argument. You're going to build your own constructive speech. So your argument should have what we call the most effective line of reasoning, so that people who are listening to your argument can draw the same conclusion that you are doing in your argument. Before going into the actual elements of your argument, we have to point out an important part of your argument, which are known as contentions. And contentions are the limitations that define your argument. If there are elements that you are not going to include in your argument, then you need to build the necessary contentions for it. Contentions are important so that your arguments are not general and not specific. So if you have arguments that are general and not specific to a certain topic, a certain place, certain people, then you will run the possibility of creating a fallacy of arguing for a general understanding or a general opinion. That's why you need to create more contentions to drill down on your specific points in your arguments. For example, if you want to talk about how effective a nation is in fulfilling their daily tasks and routines. Your argument has to be specific to a certain place, to a certain area, to a certain scope of people, to a certain time of the day, so that your argument can be really specific to that place, to that area, to that time zone. Then once you establish this, you need to create three important elements in your argument. Number one, claim. Number two, warrant. Number three, impact. Claim is the actual statement you're making or you're proposing for or against your argument. And be careful here, your claim has to be very specific. It has to avoid any fallacy and logic, and it has to be really specific and really focused. Your claim has to be based on evidence, based on premise, and based on a warrant. So warrants are the guarantees that guarantee your claim. If you don't have a powerful warranty for your claim, then your claim would be just an opinion or just a tall claim that has a lot of fallacy. So warrants are the evidences and the proof that will back up your claim. And without prior preparation, you can't build and establish enough warrant for your claim to stand strong. And the last part is impact. The impact is the future consequences of adapting or adopting your claim. So if your claim was powerful and forward thinking and forward moving, the impact will be felt by anyone listening to you or even anyone in the society. So you need to put these three elements, three parts of your argument in your line of reasoning before going ahead with your argument. That's the two-man model. So the claim has to be clearly defined statement. And in this, we have to point out to two types of statements, an inductive statement and a deductive statement. We need to reduce our percentage of inductive statements and increase our percentage of deductive statements. Inductive statements are usually based on little observations, or they are made on a general concept of understanding over the common sense. So for example, if I have a friend who comes from a certain country, then that friend is supposed to meet me over coffee. And for whatever reason, the person is late for our meeting, an inductive statement would be all people from that country are lazy in terms of timekeeping. So you see, based on a tiny observation, I made an inductive statement that generally judges everyone in that segment. That is very risky to have such inductive statement in your argument. All of your argumentation has to be focused on deductive statements. And this type of statements are based on a conclusive result of a number of observations or a huge amount of data or evidences that supports the deductive statement. Why is this very important? This is because to prove that a deductive statement is wrong, you need to prove that all the line of reasoning and the evidences is also wrong. That's why deductive statements are much more harder to counterattack or counterbalance when compared to inductive statements. So when you are preparing your arguments, you have to put them under the test of whether they are inductive or deductive statements. A few traits of the most powerful type of deductive statements. Number one, they're usually based on facts, established facts and figures. There are resources that back them up, whether they were scientific, whether they were theological, anthropological, and any type of science that is backing the resources. Number three, they have to make sense. They have to follow the same line of logical reasoning behind them. Any far-fetched statement cannot be an accepted statement because these statements usually defy logic. You may also use history because historical evidence is a strong source of evidence that you can use in your statement. and it has to be objective. Because if you're not objective, you are allowing emotions and allowing your own opinions to affect how objective your statements are. However, on the opposing side, inductive statements are usually opinions with little evidences. They come in the form of, I've heard this, everyone is saying this, everyone is seeing this. If you see on your social media, everyone is talking about it. You see these general statements, everyone and all people and everyone in the room, they're more of opinion with little evidence. And whenever your counterpart in your debating is becoming emotionally stimulated, you know that he is trying to win extra brownie points by sounding more convincing with more emotions and more passion and raising the voice. Remember, you don't need to increase your volume to make your statements loud. If the statement is powerful, they are loud by themselves. The inductive statements are also usually backed by very limited personal observation. You have to remember that your own personal experience may not be the same experience for other people. So you got to be careful about that, making those observations, because if you're not backing up your observations with the right amount of general data, then you're risking that your own personal experience may not be the same as the experience of other people. Sometimes it can be irrational, it doesn't make sense. This is because it's based on your own perceived feeling and opinion about a matter. And they're extreme and subjective. Sometimes they're also offensive to some people and some professions. So you really need to put your statements under the microscope and avoid having these inductive statements in your argument. Examples of inductive statements, and there are very, very general and very, very famous ones. Like, for example, if you look at the flat earth argument, there are a lot of people who are arguing for a flat earth. There are conventions, there are conferences where people get together and feel convinced and try to convince others that the earth is flat, despite the overwhelming amount of evidence, scientific, logical, social, anthropological, political, geopolitical, that simply denies this theory. Another example is a very recent one, is when the previous US President, Donald Trump, prophesied that drinking Lysols and Clorox can kill the coronavirus, for example. That was another example of inductive statement. Even the 5G towers and the link with the virus is another inductive statement. The Malaysian airplane that disappeared, there was a very irrational, illogical opinion that the airplane landed safely and somewhere in Africa, and the passengers are enjoying their own life there. Even landing on the moon is a subject of an inductive statement. And there are so many people that believe that landing on the moon did not happen, and all of this was just a propaganda to promote NASA and promote a false image of landing on the moon. These were just examples of inductive statements. So as a member of both teams, what is your most perfect line of reasoning if you're speaking for the affirmative or the negative? If you were speaking for the affirmative, you need to follow what we call the stock issue case. The stock issue case is handling the resolution by proposing the status quo, or the current status, and proposing a change in the current status. And for that, you need to create a chain of reasoning. So if we do this, we will get this. Remember, in the affirmative, you are proposing change. And to make it easier for people to accept the change, you have to create a nice chain of reasoning in your proposal to change the status quo. You can use topical cases, and topical cases are only focused on the topic at hand, addressing the topic at hand without moving to adjacent or disjunct cases. So a disjunctive cases is a parallel case, not the main case, but a parallel case in which you're trying to reach the main case by addressing the disjunctive case. Then you will have the third type of stock issue case, which is a residual case. In any change of reasoning, there's always one niche that you can't address. If you're attempting a topic of social impact, maybe one certain residual extra topic part of your case you can't really address in that given time and period. However, if you're on the negative side, you're arguing for a dynamic status quo. You want to defend the actual current status, but to make it a little bit more dynamic, as if you are accepting some sort of change, but not a major change in the current status. Then you counterbalance the plan proposed by the affirmative team. Then you use what we call the even if argument. The even if argument is the most powerful way to shut down any proposed change by the affirmative team. By saying that even if we apply this, this will happen. And even if statements is also creating a straw man argument. You take a certain aspect of the affirmative team plan and you shoot it down by creating a slippery slope that even if we attempt this change plan, we will create massive consequences that will destroy our joy and happiness now. And if you're other negative, all you have to do also is to directly refute any possible line of reasoning to change the plan of the current status. That's why it's easier to be on the negative side, because all you do is to refute the affirmative team cases. And that's why 60% maybe of your debates are won by the negative side. Your checklist before coming forward with your arguments and creating your line of reasoning is to depend on a trio of themes. You can either go for the ethos or pathos or logos. You either go for principles, for emotions, or for logic. Choose any one of them to be your main theme of your line of reasoning. You also need to think about reinforcing and not repeating your arguments. There are so many teams try to repeat the same line of reasoning across all three speakers. That's not really effective, because repeating it doesn't mean that you're going to win the debate at the end. All you need to do is to reinforce your previous speaker's arguments and add more weight and power to them instead of repeating the actual line of reasoning. You also need to think about a very powerful transition, how to start and how to end your debate. You can't just start debating and end your debate with a sudden way of ending your argument. There has to be a perfect start by stating your team's position and ending by restating again your team position, and yet you're enforcing your team captain or your second speaker in the statement of your team. Also, you need to really converge in your line of reasoning and forget about all that diverging tangents in the line of reasoning, because if you do that, you'll distract the people listening to your argument. Diving into a conclusive statement is much more powerful than diverting all over the place. Also remember, you need to be an active argumentative person. You can't just stand there and accept everything to be reactive. You need to attack and counterbalance any upcoming arguments by being active team member and role player in your team as a whole holistic approach to debating. You also need to practice note keeping and not passing, because there's no chance for you to help your team members without taking notes and passing those notes to your team members. There are points to remember. Please avoid screaming. It doesn't mean that you're right. You can send across your arguments in the most calm and collected tone of voice. Do not attack the person, attack the argument. Don't create argumentum ad hominem fallacies. You're not here to attack the person. It doesn't matter if the person is tall or short, black and white, thin or fat. What matters is what the person said in the arguments. Always remember to be sensitive to culture and professions. You can't be attacking professions and cultures. Don't make any judgments. Don't make any hasty judgments is more important. And do not pile up on a weak member of the other teams. It's not ethical to pile up on a person who, once you see that the person has a weak argument or was not convincing in laying forward the arguments, you can attack the person, but piling up can be similar to bullying. So be careful about that. My last point, it's not table topics. You need to prepare to become an effective debater in this part. That was the whole material for today. I hope that you have reached a better understanding on how to build cases in your debate. And I look forward to seeing you again in other topics related to your debate preparation and debate effectiveness. Thank you very much.